Welcome to The Explainer. So let's talk about the U.S. Constitution, America's official rulebook. Now, you might picture changes to it as this really slow, careful, even boring process, right? But history tells a totally different story. The biggest, most important edits to the Constitution, they almost never happen when things are calm. No, they're forged in the fire of a full-blown national crisis. You see, the founders, they weren't naive. They knew the country would face challenges they couldn't even dream of. So they gave us an edit button, the amendment process. It's a way for future generations to adapt. And man, throughout history, that button has been slammed during the absolute toughest moments, forcing the country to take a hard look at what it really stands for. So today, we're going to dive into 3 of those exact moments. We're talking about a nation literally torn apart by war, a democracy completely divided over whether women should even have a say, and a government paralyzed by one terrifying question: who's in charge? Each one of these crises forced a permanent, game-changing rewrite of the Constitution. All right, let's jump right in with our first crisis, the end of the Civil War. I mean, the fighting had finally stopped, but in its place, the country was staring into a constitutional black hole. Okay, think about this. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. It freed enslaved people in the Confederacy, sure, but that was a wartime order. So when the war ended, what happened? What was their legal status? Were they citizens? Could they just be re-enslaved? The Constitution was completely silent. And that left 4 million people, 4 million, in this incredibly dangerous legal limbo. And what Congress did next was honestly stunning. They used the amendment process like a rapid-fire correction tool. It wasn't just one fix, it was a 3-part constitutional revolution, all pushed through in just 5 years. First, bam, the 13th Amendment makes freedom permanent. Then, the 14th comes in and completely redefines what it means to be a citizen. And finally, the 15th grants the right to vote to black men. Or at least, that was the promise. So that first crisis, it just exploded into all-out war. But our second one, well, this one simmered for decades. It challenged the very idea of American democracy with a question that seems so simple now, but was radical then. Should half the entire country even be allowed to vote? I mean, just look at this journey. The persistence it took is just mind-boggling. From that very first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, this wasn't a short battle. This was a multi-generational struggle. It was fought in town halls, in state legislatures, and out on the streets, year after agonizing year. 72 years. Just let that number sink in for a second. 72 years. Entire generations of women were born, lived their whole lives, and died, all while this fight for a basic right, the right to vote, was going on. It's truly one of the longest, most difficult social movements in all of American history. And can you believe it? After all those decades of struggle, it all came down to a single vote. In Tennessee, of all places, the legislature was deadlocked, 48-48. And the deciding vote? It fell to the youngest guy there, a 23-year-old named Harry T. Burn. And get this, he had a letter from his mom in his pocket telling him to be a good boy and do the right thing. He listened to her, cast his aye vote, and literally changed the course of history. And just like that, with that one single vote, a 72-year fight was over. The 19th Amendment was law. That fall, over 8 million American women went to the polls and voted for the very first time. I mean, talk about reshaping the entire American electorate forever. Okay, so our third crisis is a little different. This wasn't a war, it wasn't a massive social movement. Instead, it was a series of these quiet, frankly terrifying moments that exposed a huge flaw at the very top of the government. The question was simple and scary. What do you do when the president is alive, but just can't lead? The problem was the original Constitution was just dangerously vague about what happens next. And these weren't just hypothetical what-ifs. I mean, back in 1841, President Harrison dies and his VP, John Tyler, basically just says, "I'm president now," and makes up the rules as he goes. Fast forward to 1919, Woodrow Wilson has a massive stroke and he's completely out of commission for months, and they hide it from the public. The country had no real leader. Then you have Eisenhower's heart attack and, of course, Kennedy's assassination in '63. It was one crisis after another hammering home the same point. We need clear rules and we need them now. And here's a really wild bit of trivia for you. So where did the lawmakers working on this problem get their inspiration? You're not going to believe it. Hollywood. Yep, the 1954 movie, The Caine Mutiny. It's about a ship's crew that has to remove their unstable captain from command during a crisis, And the politicians watching it were like, wait a minute, that's it. That's a perfect illustration of the exact problem we're trying to solve for the presidency. So the solution they came up with was the 25th Amendment, which finally got ratified in 1967. And it laid out a super clear four-part plan for pretty much any scenario you can imagine. It officially makes the vice president the successor, it creates a way to fill the VP spot if it becomes empty, and, crucially, it sets up two different ways to handle a president who can't do their job. One where the president voluntarily hands over power for a bit, like for a medical procedure, and a second, more dramatic path for when the VP and cabinet have to step in during a real crisis of leadership. But here's the thing, and this is the big lesson from all three of these stories. Getting an amendment passed, that's not the finish line, not even close. In reality, it's often just the starting gun for a whole new fight. The battle to make the words on the page mean something in the real world for everybody. I mean, just look at the disconnect here. The promise of the 15th Amendment was crystal clear. The right to vote can't be denied because of race. But the reality? Well, for almost 100 years, that promise was systematically torn apart, especially in the South, using this whole web of nasty discriminatory tactics. And this system became known as Jim Crow. And we have to be clear, this was way more than just segregated water fountains. This was an entire legal architecture built from the ground up with one goal in mind: to strip away every single bit of political power and the civil rights that those new amendments were supposed to guarantee. And that delay, it is just staggering. It took 95 years, from when the 15th Amendment was passed until the Voting Rights Act of 1965, when the federal government finally stepped in to actually enforce that constitutional right and protect the vote for millions of Black Americans. And it wasn't just the 15th Amendment either. The same thing happened with the 19th. Sure, it banned voting discrimination based on sex, but that didn't magically erase all the barriers based on race. So women of color, especially in the South, found themselves facing the exact same poll taxes, literacy tests, and intimidation that Black men had been facing all along. It just proves the point. A victory on paper is only ever the first step. So after all of this, what's the big takeaway? What should we remember about how America's rulebook actually gets changed? Well, first, that the Constitution isn't some dusty relic locked away in a museum. It's a living document, something that's meant to be changed and challenged. Second, these huge edits, they don't just happen. They're born out of intense national crisis. They're the ultimate course correction tool for when the country has truly lost its way. And maybe most importantly, the fight doesn't end when the ink is dry. The words on the page are only ever the beginning. And that, of course, leaves us with one final big question. You know, every single one of these amendments probably seemed impossible right before the crisis that made it absolutely necessary. So it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What huge challenge, what deep crisis facing the nation right now might be setting the stage for the next one, the 28th Amendment?